Welcome to Halftime, a show dedicated to equipping and inspiring halftime alumni to accomplish what God has prepared for them. I'm Doug Piper, and I'm a halftime alumni like maybe many of you, and these webinars are actually part of my halftime journey. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we have Lloyd Reeb, and Lloyd shares with us each month helpful ideas to aid us with our halftime journey. Lloyd is a successful real estate developer that made a midlife transition, looking for greater meaning, joy, and impact in his second half. For over 20 years, Lloyd has helped leaders make their second half their very best half. He's the founding partner of Halftime Institute, which is a global team that teaches and coaches and connects successful men and women in their pursuit of significance. He's taken this message around the world, and Lloyd is also the author of several books, including From Success to Significance, When the Pursuit of Success Isn't Enough, and with his wife, Linda, co-wrote Halftime for Couples. Now, if that sounds like where you are or where you have been, and you'd like to work on creating more significance in your life, or maybe you know someone that is in that season, you can find out more by going to halftime.org. That is www.halftime.org, or just click the link at the bottom center of your screen. I'll also have that information at the end of the program. Now, today on Halftime, Lloyd is going to be sharing maybe one of the most timely topics that we've done to date, and that is preparing to reset your life. So, Lloyd, hopefully if the internet's cooperating here, we can bring you up on screen. Welcome,
Hey,
Lloyd.
Thanks, man.
We're
Thanks
all
for your...
we're all emerging from this crisis, and I suspect most of us will have changed in various ways. Habits have been broken, routines have changed, and maybe we even have some new priorities. But possibly more importantly, how do we learn from this experience?
Yeah, so Doug, thanks for your partnership and friendship on this journey of sharing what we glean from others with our Halftime alumni tribe all around the world. You know, regardless of how quickly our economies bounce back from this crisis, you and I can prepare now to make the next season of our life the very most creative and productive season. And we can use this as an opportunity to press the reset button. You know, a crisis often brings clarity. It brings an opportunity for our perspective to change, and an opportunity to intentionally press the reset button. We know that our life doesn't consist of the abundance of things that we possess or we gather. And we also know that a great life isn't defined by what it gets, but by what it brings. And I've had the privilege now of coaching many people, successful leaders, through the last two big crises. I've been at this for 22 years now, and 9/11 hit in the middle of many people's halftime journeys, and they had to press the reset button. And then 2008, 2009 financial crisis hit, and a whole nother batch of people had to press the reset button. And they were anticipating that their second half would just go smoothly. And I've watched some of them come out the other side and thrive in their next season, and some come through a crisis and simply not thrive. And the question is, what can we learn from that, and what made the difference? Bob Buford, you know, the founder of the Halftime Institute, he boiled his life mission down to go on a t-shirt, and it just said 100 and a big X, 100X. In other words, he wanted his life to be the soil that produced 100-fold yield. It comes from the parable Jesus told about soil. And he said to view your life like soil, and the soil has the potential to produce 100 times the seeds that are planted in it. Imagine if the next season of your life produced 100-fold. Like, just take a second and try to visualize what would 100 times impact through your life look like? I once asked Bob Buford to do that. I asked him, tell me, what do you envision if our work at the Halftime Institute turned out to be 100-fold impact? And he said, I envision a long hallway with 100 framed photos of men and women who have discovered their calling and been all in for their second half, and they're multiplying themselves 100 times over. And below each picture would be a little inset paragraph of what they're doing that's unique to their calling to bring compassion and God's love and forgiveness to this world. That's visualizing your second half. It's very helpful as part of your reset to stop and visualize, what would 100-fold impact look like in my life? If it happened, it would be such a blessing in others' lives. And just think about the joy it would bring to you and I. I want to share two matched pairs. There's power in comparing matched pairs. So people, for example, or businesses, and in this case, people who were both successful, who both wanted their second half to really count for something, to be the most productive season of their life for God. But one turned out well and one turned out poorly. And I want to talk about one man that I grew to know and love. I'll call him Bill, but that's not his real name. He was a real estate developer. I'm a real estate developer. In 2006 and 7, he bought 8 or 10,000 acres of orange orchards in Florida. It was a bad time to buy those orchards. And then in 2009, 10, 11, he went through a terrible bankruptcy. He lost his marriage. He lost the big home on the lake. He lost perspective. He isolated himself from the people around him that loved him, that could have brought perspective and helped him press the reset button. In Bill's life, his next season could have been the very best season. But in 2010, he committed suicide. And as you can imagine, as his coach, that was a gut punch for me. That has forced me to take this topic very seriously. And by contrast, in 2011, I was traveling through Asia with a dear friend, Terry Knudsen, who had come through Halftime a few years before, sold his company, was looking for ways to give his money away to advance God's kingdom around the world. And so we went through Asia together, and we would do halftime talks, and he would share his story, and then he would look for places where he could give that would make a big difference. And one day we were at the top of one of the most beautiful buildings I know of in the world in Singapore, called the Marina Bay Sands. It's twin towers, probably 60 stories high, and at the top there, what it looks like a big boat across straddling both towers. And there's a park up there with big trees and a pool and restaurants. And you imagine sitting, having a drink, looking over the city of Singapore and the second busiest port in the world. And you're 60 stories up. And the economy at the time in 2011 in Singapore was growing at over 11%. And there were 30 or 40 towers in the air, building beautiful buildings. And I looked at Terry and I said to him, Terry, as you look out over this scene, what do you know for sure? And without even blinking an eye, he said, it won't always be this way. And so we made an agreement together that during our trip, we would work on one question. How can we prepare to live out our calling and make our biggest impact in the darkest hours when the next global crisis hits this world? And here we are. And so I reached out to Terry just this week to say, Terry, do you remember that time? Do you remember what we wrote down, the one-pagers we created together? And Terry wrote back to me and said, interesting how that time at the top of the hotel in Singapore has become a defining moment in our lives. Watching the world and our country we live in catapult into an unknown world has been sobering and inspiring. I love seeing how we are adjusting and restructuring ourselves and what we do to continue to have impact and kingdom results. Feels like we are riding a roller coaster, high speed ups and downs in real time. The key is flowing with the Spirit of God and defending against the powers of darkness. No easy task. And I feel like the last 6 weeks have been the most productive weeks of my life. And so you and I can choose to be the good soil. That's what Jesus was talking about. So Doug, let's take a second and look at the poll. The poll is really such a great, helpful tool for you and I, isn't it?
It really is. It gives us some great insight. And, personally, I think this current crisis is going to be the most significant for me. First of all, I'm in the demographic that maybe is the most vulnerable to the virus.
That's elderly. That's called elderly, Doug.
I was trying to be a little more tactful because you're in there with me.
Exactly.
But in my previous world, I was in manufacturing and associated with a lot of military and aerospace components, and there was a military response to almost every previous crisis. And as a result, we just got busier, and for the most part, I was more focused on a business response. And I'm not in that position anymore. And so this is quite much more significant to me as far as deeply affecting me. Maybe others there can relate to that. And Lloyd, as we discussed earlier, it hasn't shifted a lot. The poll, and we would appreciate you weighing in on it. It's very quick and very easy. So the question is this: what do you feel is the most important thing you need to do to focus and allow you to reboot your life after this crisis? So we have 5 answers. The first answer is, and it's right around 30%, deepening my inner world, focusing on spiritual growth. The highest one so far actually is getting clearer on my personal mission and staying focused on it. And that's around 42%. Neck and neck with the first one is the next one, which is greater adaptability, discovering how to adapt to how I serve to this new normal that will emerge. And actually, with no votes, is creating margin for more resilience to withstand the setbacks and crisis in the future. And then the final one is adjusting or changing my platform, such as changing jobs, companies, and or commitments. So Lloyd, it appears if we focus in on my personal mission and staying focused on it, second to that, deepening my inner world and focusing on spiritual growth, and then last at 22% is greater adaptability, discovering how I'll adapt and how I will serve to this new normal that will emerge.
Okay, good. So let's try to zoom in then and do maybe a deep dive on those, Doug, together. And again, you guys all know that Doug and I aren't bringing smart answers that we concocted in some basement somewhere. This is the Open Architect. The Halftime Institute is about learning from our peers, and questions are more helpful than smart answers. So, let's take a look though first, Doug, at this topic of the soil, because this is ancient wisdom for our lives today to help us think this through. And so, here's what I want to do is let's just read what Jesus' words, and if you compile what he said from the 3 different gospels where he told this story, here's what he said. I'll just read it in my distilled version. May I not be like the soil among thorns, on which seeds were sown, like those who hear the word, but the worries of this world and the deceitfulness of riches and pleasure, in other words, they promise one thing and they don't deliver, and the desires for other things come in and choke and make it immature and unfruitful. Instead, may I be like the good soil. And notice that's volitional. You have agency. You and I can choose to be the good soil. It's not like we're just either, lucky, Doug, and we're born with good soil, or we're unlucky and we're born with the bad soil. This is volitional. He was saying, you and I can be like the soil, the good soil. Now, here's how it describes it. Like those with a noble heart and a good heart, hear the word, understand what it means, accept it. In other words, take responsibility for it, and then persevere. With perseverance, bear fruit, yielding 30, 60, 100 times what was sown. So here's what I take out of that has to do directly with you and I pressing the reset button. Is number one, you get to decide what kind of soil you want to be in this next season. You can choose a lifestyle where your mind is not dominated by the cares of this world. You can choose a lifestyle where your mind is not dominated by the cares of this world, but it takes discipline. You can get disillusioned. You know, the root word for disillusion means to remove the illusion. There's something very healthy about getting disillusioned. Get disillusioned around riches and pleasure. They simply don't deliver on their promise. The sooner you and I get disillusioned, the easier it will be to press the reset button and reprioritize post this crisis. And then you can cultivate a noble and a good heart. This is about the heart journey. This is about the inner spiritual growth that we were all circling on our poll. And then take the time to hear and understand what God is saying to me. That's daily time with the Lord, regular silent retreats, probably some other disciplines, having a personal board of directors around me that can bring perspective. That's what Bill was missing, is he was missing those people around him. He turned his back on the people around him instead of leaning in. And sometimes, like when a dog gets injured, particularly for us men, when we go through crisis, we isolate ourselves. The most dangerous thing you can do is get isolated. You can't reset without being engaged with other people. So then the last piece is really accepting the assignment and focus. That's perseverance. And you train for it. You know, one of the guys I'm coached, I've been on this journey with, Mike Z for short, did the Kona Ironman at age 65. You know, and what I noticed is he didn't just try to go do it, you know, get on an airplane, go to Hawaii and try to compete with the world's best athletes. He trained to compete and come in 19th out of whatever for his age category. And I watched him because we were on the phone every month through his training. That's what I want to do for the next season. That's what I want to do to persevere after this and press a reset button and be in the game and be available and persevere so that I can produce 100-fold in my life. So that's a quick snapshot. Doug, thoughts going through your mind?
Yeah, you know, I can relate to the disillusionment, but I'm vulnerable to discouragement. You know, when things don't go smoothly, as an engineer, I obsess sometimes on solutions and get very focused on that. And so that's discouragement is something that when you enter and go into new challenges, for me, is a real vulnerability. So the disillusionment, discouragement, I can especially relate to.
Yeah, and when I say disillusion, I mean, don't get disillusioned with life, but get disillusioned, take the illusion away that wealth and pleasure are going to come through for us. Yeah. You know, we might not see the 100x return on life in our lifetime, but we will see it in eternity. And I was on a call recently led by Glenn Williams, who is the COO of Halftime globally. And he had 13 or 14 leaders from every continent that all lead roundtables and halftime summits and the Halftime Institute events in Africa and Asia and Europe and here in America and India. And I thought, if Bob could only hear, you know, Ajay from India and his wonderful, smooth, just charming accent talking about the halftime process and the 3 C's and things that are part of our journey, right, as alumni. That's what, you know, Bob was dreaming of. And he got to see the 100x yield, the 100 people in that long hallway that he visualized, but he hasn't seen the 1000x that's continuing to extend right now. And that's what's going to happen in your life and mine and each of the people on our call, if we choose to be the good soil. And Doug, I see this in your life. Let me talk about some of the things I wrote down on my one pager. And then I was saying to you earlier this week that I see these things, you've been living out these things so that you're available to serve. And so if you go back to the Marina Bay Sands, right, Doug, top of that, I mean, you've seen that building online, and I came away with a one-pager that I've tried to live out over the last 9 years. Some of it's gone well, some hasn't, but I think we can learn from it, just like Terry and I have benefited from it. And the first step was around this question of deepening your inner world, and I called it renovating my heart. The place to start to reset your world is to renovate your heart, and that is, kind of for me, three things. What defines me? My identity was historically wrapped around being a real estate developer. What is it that how can I allow God to reshape my identity so that it's not vulnerable when something goes down? And I was on a call last night with 8 or 10 real estate developers that have built great platforms, and yet they've seen parts of them crumble. Does your identity crumble when your platform crumbles like that? Get disillusioned from wealth and pleasure. It doesn't mean don't enjoy wealth and pleasure. But he said, don't count on it. Jesus was saying the best way to protect your heart so you can be the soil that produces great fruit is don't count on wealth and pleasure. Now, one of the things that I wrote down on my list was train my heart how to abase and abound. This is what Paul talked about, right? I have learned both how to abase, in other words, live with less, or shipwreck and all the list of things that he talked about, and abound, and to live with lots. And this is an area where I've really underperformed, I think, in the last 9 years, is learning what it takes. What if I'm called to serve in a concentration camp someday? I mean, who knows? For the next 30 years, we're likely to experience lots of different crises. That's not pessimism. That's just really preparing. And so I need to grow some in that area. Get clear on what you have that's priceless, and then protect it. This is a classic question in the halftime journey, right? And you can pull it back out now as you press the reset button. Make a list of all the things you have that are priceless. And your company doesn't go on that list because there's a value. Somebody could come up with a value on your company or your investments or your house or your boats and stuff. But what do you have that's priceless? And what are you doing to protect it? So renovate my heart. And then a second thing, and by the way, one of the things that I put on that list that's been helpful is to study great leaders who've made their best contribution in the darkest times, like Bonhoeffer. Read Eric Metaxas' book on Bonhoeffer. It's about 400 pages long. It'll take you a summer. But, you're getting a deep look into the lives of other people who pressed the reset button, in his case, when World War II hit. And he thrived, even though it cost him his life. He made his biggest impact. The second is building core stability. And this is something you've done a great job at. Get clear on your mission, your strengths, your passions, your character, values, and then invest in some daily disciplines of listening to God, time with the Lord, a personal board, silent retreats, intimate relationships. You have had Doug, first of all, you're clear on your calling, right? And this is what you do, and you've gotten better. And then you've got your tribe back together, I think, every week now. Since this crisis has hit. So talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's actually been fun. I got out of my roundtable, I guess, about 3 years ago. And I'm physically distant from the majority of our group by almost 100 miles. So a lot of our group got together because a lot of them were in the same town, and a couple of others, we were not able to regroup. And so I was into this online meeting stuff anyway. And I said, hey guys, I think we can still continue the roundtable afterwards. And the interest wasn't there. But now that the crisis has hit with COVID and we've been quarantined, one of the guys who's kind of our, I guess, informal leader has been instrumental in actually setting up a weekly event that we've all attended. And since we started the first one, we have continued it. And while we haven't had but 100% attendance one time, we've had about 80% of our roundtable every week. And I think it's developing a great new habit. And it's, we will emerge from this crisis changed. And then we just need to choose wisely. And I think that's what we're talking about today.
So it's difficult to know how to press the reset button, what to prioritize more and what to get rid of if you don't know your calling, right? So you're clear that this is your core competency, what you're doing here. You do it both in your area of passion, which is around world-class beverages like coffees, etc. And you'll get 800 people on this kind of a thing and lead them through an interesting conversation. You love it. You're like a sommelier in so many categories. And then you bring the same talent over here. So you've been clear on your mission. You've decluttered your life of a lot of things, and you're building skills that have been, here it is at this time of crisis. You're able to make, Doug, who would have thought you're serving people today in Europe and Africa, Indonesia? Have you ever been to Indonesia?
No, I'm not. Singapore's the closest, but I didn't get to the marina sands.
It may not have been built. It's pretty new. So, okay. So firstly, renovate my heart. Secondly, build core stability. Get clear on my mission, strengths, passions, character, values, and invest in productive disciplines like daily time with the Lord, silent retreats, intimate relationships.
Lloyd, I just wanted to add one thing as I was trying to decide where to focus my time, because I did have margin when I changed. One of the things that we discussed in our roundtable was what gives you energy. And I realized very quickly certain things were more of a burden, and other things really you walked away from it just energized and exhausted in a positive sense. And it's just a reminder, I think, to everybody, that's one of the key indicators.
Yeah. You love doing these things and serving people, right? But really, you may not enjoy being up in front of a stage in a public setting. And this is just you. And that's why I love doing this together and our friendship. The other thing that Terry and I wrote down was to keep our center of gravity low. That's about adaptability. One of the great attributes we see in people who are finishing well in their second half is their adaptability. And if you have a strong core, but a flexible context, then you can see how going forward, you can build on this the clarity comes from, a solid, mission statement, and clarity as a filter of what you invest in, but flexing how you live it out. And, in the last 6 weeks, I've had to completely reinvent how we deliver the halftime message around the world. But it's been because, number one, we simplified our lives. One of the things that my partner and I did was we paid off our buildings, and we have no debt here at home. We paid cash for our house 25 years ago. So just in terms of the mental, remember Jesus talked about the cares of the world. During this crisis, I have no mental share of mine going to debt issues or trying to maintain cash flow, and we have cash margin. That's something that takes discipline. You have to prepare for. And so you want to ask yourself, going forward, how can you keep your center of gravity low? What baggage am I carrying right now that I could let go of? That's something that, frankly, I've worked on since the time in 2011, Doug, and it's been huge. It has paid off because I could sit here completely unburdened by a lot of things and stay focused on my unique calling. And it has been not only a joy, but really productive. And then the last piece is invest in your platform for impact. Every one of us needs a platform to make an impact. And when you press the reset button, come back to investing in that platform. How will you hone your message and your skills to serve the people you're called to serve? How will you build the tribe of people around you? And so we've got some tools that can help you figure out, who is my tribe? What do I need on my unique abilities team? How do I love the people around me and my family more extravagantly? And how do I, build a tribe of people that I'm serving? As you listen to Doug's and my webinars, you'll find those attributes in the people that we interview. And so just to kind of get really crystal clear on that, number one, renovate your heart, or my heart. Number two, build core stability. Get super clear on what my mission is and the productive disciplines I need in my life to have stability at the core. And then keep my center of gravity low so that I'm adaptable. If you want to go on a fast ride on a winding road like the Blue Ridge Parkway and here in North Carolina. You don't want a minivan, you want a Ferrari. And that's what happens when you keep your center of gravity in life low and invest in the platform in order to have impact. So, Doug, here's one place I'd like to land on before we move to questions. And that is, we have heard from our alumni that this is an important topic. It's top of mind with them. And so we're going to offer a reset program that will start this summer where you can be a part of a cohort, a small group of people online for the first several meetings to work through a reset strategy. And then once it's safe to meet, we'll meet as a group in your community near you with your peers and continue to build out a plan for the next season of your life. There's nothing like having an updated roadmap coming through a season that gives this much clarity so that you make progress on the other side.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. And as I mentioned, we've had a great time kind of regrouping with our own roundtable. And I would challenge the other alumni out there, find somebody with a Zoom account, jump on there. I think you'll find it is very rewarding. Well, we will move on to the questions in just a moment, and I'd encourage you to get yours in. It looks like we've got a couple so far. We'll do that in the second half of the program. Meanwhile, it is the top of the hour. We know many of you only allow about 30 minutes for these programs, and we appreciate you spending so much time with us today. We hope you'll catch us again. We do have another program coming up with Dale Dawson. This will be May 7th, and Dale is the former head of Stevens Investment Banking and now the founder of Bridge to Rwanda. And this will be on finding growth opportunities among disruptions. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So we're going to transition into the questions. If you need to go, we understand it. This will be fully recorded. It's at the same link that's here, plus we will get emails out to you with all the details and how to see it. Now, those of you that ask a question, you actually get a special email, and it'll be right where the question is answered in the video. So if you don't want to watch the parts you've already seen, but you want to hear your answer, you can pop in a question and actually leave, and we will answer the question, and you can watch the video later.
And Doug, just a couple of quick thoughts before we move to questions for folks that are leaving us. Number one is if this idea of reset really resonates with you, send us an email at halftime@halftime.org, and there's a link there below where it just says contact Lloyd. And then secondly, if this resonates with you, this particular message, and you think it will be helpful to your peers, we will send you obviously the recording, and you can share that. You can share that online. You can share that with your friends directly, right, Doug?
That's it's not much fun if you don't have friends to go along with the journey. All right, so we're going to transition to your questions. But Lloyd, before we do, I thought we'd touch on the poll, and it looks like it is still pretty well holding true with the most important aspects of focusing after Reboot in this crisis is getting clearer on my personal mission and staying focused on it. So that's certainly kind of where our tribe is. So the first question, and you can vote them up. Everybody gets one vote. Sebastian has our most popular question. I'm an entrepreneur for the last 20 years. Now I want to start a new business. Need guidance and God's directions.
Well, I'm an entrepreneur as well. And that means that you have the ability to see opportunities and get started on something. You may not be the best at maintaining it. I'm certainly not. The reason our business is successful is because of my business partner, and he keeps the trains running on time. But, one of the things that's interesting, Sebastian, is entrepreneurship is not limited to the for-profit world. There's the rise of the social entrepreneur. And so what I would start with is, first of all, what is my calling? What's my mission? And that usually includes three things: your strengths, which are probably around entrepreneurship, if you've had experience with that. what you care the most about, and the difference you want to make in this world. No sense building a company that just generates cash if your core calling is not generosity. I mean, what are you going to do? Just keep accumulating and accumulating stuff? But if your calling is around generosity, then you got to build some cash flow streams that you can give from. But if your calling is something different, if it's around some kind of human transformation, then you'd want to build an organization, regardless of whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, not-for-profit or an NGO, that's producing those kinds of results. So I would start with internal, which is more like archaeology, not architecture. Who am I? What's my calling? What kind of a platform could I create that will produce those kinds of human transformation? And then lastly, how can I make the cash flow work? Now, like I said, if you're clear that your calling is generosity, then you're looking for, how can I generate wealth, not for my lifestyle, but so I can give it away. So that's where I would start and the second thing would be around the people around you, but the place to start is your calling.
Bastian, it sounds like you're in the same place a lot of us have been as we began our halftime journey. So I'd encourage you to explore that further. Our next question, I'm probably going to have several opportunities to serve after the crisis. How would you recommend eliminating the good ones, but finding the great ones?
Yeah, I think that the purpose of our mission statement is to be a filter, right? It lets you decide what you say a smiling no to. Smiling no is when you see a good opportunity that's not a great opportunity. And the way to determine between those is, does this fit my calling? Your calling usually includes your strengths, your passions, and the difference you want to make in your life. So that's a good filter. And then the second question is, suppose you have 4 or 5 opportunities. I have opportunities all the time that fit my calling, and I still have to decide between them because I have 168 hours a week. I don't want to spend all that time doing ministry. I take a day a week that's just a Linda day, for example, and I take an afternoon I spend with Lindley and her little sister Parker, our 2 grandbabies. So I can only say yes to a few things. So I have to spend time with the Lord to figure out what's right. And then I ask the question, where's the leverage? Which ones have the opportunity to produce 100-fold? Where can I get more leverage from? So I think the answer to that question is really found in sort of parallel tracks. One is the cerebral, the head journey. What am I called to do? And the heart journey. What is God saying to me? Wouldn't you say, Doug? How would you?
I would, but I wanted
to
to clarify, when you say leverage, are you saying scaling? In other words, if you were to speak to a small group of 25 people and you speak to 25 people, or can you do something like this where we're speaking to over 100? Is that the scaling analogy or leverage?
Yeah, scale can be one factor in terms of leverage, and the other can be the depth of life change, right? You know, if you speak to 1,000 people for 45 minutes, in 2 weeks, they probably won't remember what you said. They might remember a story you told, but I mean, what did your pastor talk about 4 weeks ago, right? But if you work with 6 people over a year, meeting, every month, and you connect them with the coach and you connect them with each other, their lives will change deeply, And so that's where I remember Howard Hendricks coming to an event that I was doing in Dallas, and he was, the storied professor of theology at Dallas Theological Seminary. And we had 19 people in the room, and he came up to me at a break in the morning, and I said to him, well, Dr. Hendricks, I got 2 questions. Number one, why are you here? And he said, because I'm working on, he was 78 years old. I'm working on what's next in my life. And I said, what ideas do you have for improvement? And one of the things he said to me was, first of all, he said, you may think there should be hundreds of people in the room, but let me tell you, if you take any big number times this, what do you get? And his point was 0, So he said, you're better off working with a few people and deeply. And so what he was trying to do is answer this question that our listeners raised. Where will you get results? But this is really about making eye contact with the Lord. I think you and I, we have to know our calling, but to decide between the places where we serve, he says, I'll guide you with my eye. And so I think time listening to the Lord. What I love about the Lord's life is, on the one hand, he said, I am come so that, and he answered that in a single sentence. He had a single sentence purpose for being on the planet. And he set his face as a flint to go to Jerusalem. In other words, he had a strategy to execute on his mission. But every morning you read, if you turn a few pages over, he got up in the morning and went and spent time in prayer, seeking direction from his Father. And he stops and responds to a lady that spontaneously yanks on his jacket that needs help. And so if he could live with the tension between having a clear purpose statement and a strategy to execute it, daily dependence on his Father for wisdom, and being able to respond spontaneously to the needs of people that need him just now, then maybe, you and I can live with that tension, Doug.
I like that, because we certainly all use metrics to kind of judge what's good, and it's very easy to track simple numbers, but you do that leverage aspect. The other aspect is that multiplier.
Yeah.
I like that. So you need to multiply it by the significance of the depth. And if it's very shallow, it's not going to be much of a number. That's excellent. Thank you. We have 2 more questions, so get them in. The next most popular one comes from Bob. And Bob asks, Lloyd, you have mentioned a one-pager several times and in previous sessions. Can you share your formula or format?
Yeah. I'll send to you what Terry and I did, what I did, the one pager coming out of my time, in 2011. And remember, whenever you share your stuff, like I share mine freely, these are not right answers, right? But they're just one person's feeble attempt to get clarity. So I'll send it out to all of you as we send you the notes and the recording from this. My encouragement to you, though, is build your own one-pager of what you're going to do so that you can make your best contribution in the darkest days that lie ahead.
Well, good question, Bob. All right, and Mary has our last question, unless somebody else submits it, and then we will wrap things up a little earlier than usual. So Mary asks, would I be right to say going to basics again, vis-a-vis the 3 CS fine-tuning or recalibrating your mission statement and identifying the truly priceless things in your life and ring fencing them in? And then building spiritual overflow seems to be prerequisites for surviving and flourishing in the post-COVID-19 period. So it sounds like, just to summarize, recalibrating your mission statement, she's asking, is identifying truly priceless things in your life and protecting those, building spiritual overflow for survival of the post-COVID-19 period.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, I think in that question, she's just summarized, what you and I have been stumbling along trying to say, right? I mean, she's talking about the 3 C's. And if you're not familiar with the 3 C's, it's this concept that there are 3 components when you ask yourself the question, what should I do with this next season of my life after this crisis? It's too complicated to answer all in one fell swoop. So you have to break it into pieces and solve the pieces separately, put it back together. And the 3 big pieces seem to be, who are you at the core? That's one circle. How could you create capacity to live out your core? And then in what context should you serve? So imagine 3 circles overlapping where the sweet spot emerges in the middle. And so I think her point is just so well taken. These are the basics. Get clear on who you are at the core, your strengths, your passion, your mission. Figure out how to create capacity. In other words, have margin. If there's no margin, no ministry. If you're running at the edge financially, then when you get a hit like this, you get taken down. And then lastly, Be clear on your context. What organizations should you serve that fit you, and what role? There's lots of good roles, but there are probably only one or two that are great roles for you. And, in Jim Collins' book, Great by Choice, it's about luck. It's a book about luck. And, I remember him saying, coming from a faith perspective, you might not believe in luck, is what he said to me. He said, but really think about it as luck being factors that are good or bad, that are material to your business, you couldn't predict and you can't control. And he said, having studied businesses, most businesses in general have similar amounts of good luck and bad luck. But what determines the difference is their ability to get back up after bad luck, because luck is asymmetric. You could have one bad luck experience that could take you out of business, but you can't likely have one really great good luck experience that creates a sustainable long-term business. It's more asymmetric towards bad luck. So his point around her point around spiritual overflow and capacity is a really important one, because in times of crisis, we can get taken down by what he calls bad luck, or things that we couldn't foresee, can't control, and are material to our life. And the way you avoid that is to have margin, to have excess spiritual overflow, to have, lots of sleep, nutrition, health, financial margin, not be living on the edge, and friends around that can help us. This is a time not to get isolated. So I think in one question, she just summed up what you and I were kind of bumbling along trying to.
And Mary has been on quite a few of our programs. So Mary, we really appreciate you watching and actually drawing this to a great close. We appreciate that so much. Well, again, we appreciate not only Mary, but everybody else in the audience that has taken so much time today. We appreciate your time. We appreciate you joining us. We look forward to providing the resources that we have done today. And as I mentioned, we've got one coming up with, let's see if we can't make that go full screen. We've got Dale Dawson coming up, who is the former head of Stevens Investment Banking, and now the founder of Bridge to Rwanda, finding growth opportunities amongst disruption. And that's going to be on May 7th at 8 p.m. And maybe, Alyssa, you could put that link in the chat there so folks could look.
And Doug, that's 8 p.m. Central Time in the U.S. or 9 p.m. New York time. Do you know what that is in Sweden? I'm just teasing you.
They'd be 6 hours ahead.
Very good. Very good.
Well, thank you, everyone. Lloyd, especially, we appreciate your time. I know how busy you are and take time to do these programs and to speak to alumni. Well, let me just add a few of the comments that I see. So Keith says, many thanks to Alyssa, Lloyd, and Doug. Linda says, this has been very helpful. Thanks a lot. And Jenny says, it's really helpful having your real-time notes on this call, Alyssa. Thank you. So we have a great team here, and we appreciate your joining us. So with that, we will wrap up this one and look forward to next week's. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.